So let's jump right in, shall we?
Yeah.
Starting with some of the more interesting grammar that's going on. One thing that really jumped out was this idea of ellipsis in conversation.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, sure. So ellipsis is basically a way that we kind of shorten our speech by dropping words that are already obvious from what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's a great example in this episode where Ted asks, "I'm sorry, are we having a fight?" And Marshall replies, "If we were, you'd be losing."
Right, and what he really means is, if we were having a fight, you'd be losing.
Right.
He's just cutting out the having a fight part because it's already clear from what Ted just said.
Exactly. And it's not just about being concise. It's more about, like, this shared understanding that makes the conversation flow more naturally. Like, we trust each other to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if we always had to spell everything out?
Yeah,
Conversations would feel super formal and kind of tiring.
definitely. It's like that whole efficiency of language thing in action. Okay, moving on, we've got the subjunctive mood, which always sounds a bit intimidating.
It can sound a little formal, yeah.
Yeah,
But it has this super important job, which is expressing things that aren't real or are just hypothetical, like what if kind of situations.
right.
In the episode, Ted says, "If I were to move out."
And the key part there is if I were, not if I was.
Right.
Why is that specific wording so important?
So in formal or hypothetical situations, like when we're talking about things that aren't actually happening, were is the correct form of the verb to be. Was is past tense for things that already happened.
Oh,
So when Ted's talking about something hypothetical, like him moving out, were is the way to signal that we're in this realm of imagination.
I see. And the source also mentions, if I were you, I'd, as a very common way of giving advice.
Right, right.
Which makes perfect sense because it's like you're saying, in a hypothetical situation where I was you.
Exactly. The subjunctive lets us sort of step outside reality for a minute and consider all these possibilities and give advice without being too direct.
Okay, I got it. Now, fronting for emphasis sounds like something you'd find in a play or something.
Yeah.
How does that actually work in everyday conversation?
Well, it's basically a way of emphasizing a part of a sentence by putting it at the beginning. Like when Lily says, "That I cannot live with," instead of the usual way of saying it, "I cannot live with that."
Right.
By putting that at the start, she's really stressing how much she can't stand whatever it is. It makes it more dramatic.
Ah, so it adds an extra layer of like emotional weight.
Exactly. It's a way to make a point really stand out.
Okay, makes sense. Then there's the use of would for hypotheticals, which seems a little more straightforward.
Yeah, it's pretty common, actually. It's how we talk about things that are imaginary or not certain. Marshall saying, "I would totally win in a sword fight," is a perfect example.
Right.
He's not saying he actually won or that he will win, but like in this imaginary sword fight, he's totally confident.
It's that sense of possibility, like it could happen if certain things were true, right?
Exactly. Like, if I had an extra hour, I would finally clean my desk.
Right, right.
What helps us build these if-then scenarios, even if we don't actually say the if part out loud?
Makes sense. Next, we have relative clauses. Those are the ones that use who, which, and that to add extra information, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
They're like little bonus descriptions attached to a noun?
Right.
Ted saying, "She's the girl who made me believe in fate." That's a classic relative clause.
So who made me believe in fate is giving us more information about the girl.
That's it. Who is the link between the description and the specific girl he's talking about?
I see.
It's how we build more complex sentences in English.
Gotcha. And finally, we've got double modals, which, according to our source, are not really proper grammar.
Oh, yeah. This one's fun.
That sounds interesting.
It's when you hear two modal verbs like might and could used together. Like, I might could go to the party.
Right.
You might hear this in some dialects, especially in the South, but it's generally not considered standard English.
So not something you'd write in an essay.
Probably not, no.
Right.
But it's still important to know about because it shows how diverse spoken English can be.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That's a fascinating look at all the grammar stuff we might not even realize is happening while we're watching. Let's switch gears now and dive into the cultural references, because this is where the episode really gets another layer of meaning.
Absolutely. Understanding these references unlocks a whole new level of appreciation for the humor and the context of the show.
Right.
And we should probably start with Fight Club, right?
Okay, so for anyone who might not know, Fight Club, the movie, came out in the late 90s.
Yeah.
And it was about this secret underground fight club How does that connect to Ted and Marshall's very tame sword fight?
Well, it's a really funny parallel. The whole idea of them having these secret sword duels to settle their arguments is a direct play on the movie's whole underground fighting thing. And when they say the first rule of Duel Club is you do not talk about Duel Club,
Right.
it's a clear reference to the famous Fight Club line. The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club. It's a way to immediately connect with the audience and be in on the joke. So, is the humor also kind of pointing out how silly it is for guys to, even in a playful way, resort to fighting to solve problems?
Maybe, yeah, it definitely plays on those traditional ideas of masculinity and conflict, but in a very lighthearted way.
For sure.
Okay, what about this whole settling it like men with swords thing? That feels like something from a bygone era.
It totally is. It's a funny nod to those old school duels, often with swords, that they used to have to settle disputes, like what you see in old movies.
Yeah.
Ted and Marshall using swords to decide who gets the apartment is poking fun at that whole concept. Like, how ridiculous would it be to use this super dramatic, old fashioned solution for a small, modern day argument?
Right, they're taking this super serious, hyper-masculine way of doing things and putting it in a completely silly situation.
Exactly. And the humor comes from that contrast.
Okay, so there's a part where Ted does this really exaggerated morning radio DJ voice.
Yeah.
Can you explain for our listeners who might not be familiar with American radio what that typical style is?
Sure. Morning radio DJs in America often have this really over the top, energetic, sometimes cheesy kind of vibe. It's all about entertaining people as they start their day. It's a very specific style, lots of fast talking, sound effects, silly jokes.
Right.
When Ted does that voice and says, "You're listening to the Ted and Marshall Morning Zoo," he's making fun of the crazy names and general goofiness of those morning shows.
It's that high energy, slightly ridiculous delivery, right? Yeah. I feel like I'd recognize it even though I don't listen to American radio.
Yeah, it's become a classic trope.
Now, the source mentions that having swords as decorations can be a bit of a stereotype of a bachelor pad.
Oh, yeah.
What's the cultural connection there?
So, the idea of a bachelor pad is this kind of stereotype of how single men live. The apartment might be messy or decorated with guy stuff.
Yeah.
Hanging swords on the wall definitely fits that image. It's a little unconventional, a bit aggressive, maybe something a young guy who's into fantasy or whatever would have.
Right.
Lily not being too impressed by the swords shows the contrast with, more feminine or shared living space.
So it's kind of a visual shortcut for a certain type of single guy's lifestyle.
Pretty much, yeah. And that brings us to the term bachelor pad itself.
Okay, so we've talked about the decor, but what are the bigger cultural implications of a bachelor pad?
Well, it's often seen as more than just a place where a single guy lives. It's associated with a certain lifestyle, more focused on having fun and less on, adult responsibilities.
Hmm.
And the decor reflects that. Marshall and Ted's apartment, with the swords and all that, is presented as this classic bachelor pad before Lily shows up and brings in a more homey, domestic vibe.
Right. It's almost like a stage of life, culturally speaking.
Yeah, exactly. Like a temporary setup before settling down.
Finally, Barney makes this joke comparing Lily moving in to the premise of The Golden Girls.
Yeah.
For those who haven't seen it, what's the cultural significance of referencing that show?
So The Golden Girls was a hugely popular sitcom in the 80s about these four older women living together in Miami.
Okay.
It was all about female friendship and supporting each other and the funny side of getting older. Barney's joke is funny because it's such a huge contrast to the whole bachelor pad thing.
Right.
Like, he's implying that Lily moving in is going to turn their wild single guy apartment into this cozy domestic situation.
Yeah.
It's this super unexpected comparison that gets its humor from the complete shift in dynamic.
Right. It's that surprise element that makes the joke work.
Okay, wow, this has been so insightful.
It's amazing how much depth there is to a single episode of a sitcom when you start thinking about the language and the cultural stuff.
It just goes to show how intertwined entertainment is with language and culture. First up, useful phrases. And the one that jumps out right away, at least for me, is "this is happening." It seems so simple, but it packs a punch. Remember when Lily actually starts moving her stuff in?
Oh, yeah. And Ked's just like, this is happening.
Right. It's that feeling of surprise, like something's coming, but then it actually hits you.
It's that moment when it becomes real, undeniable. It's not just a possibility anymore. It's happening. And I think we've all had those moments.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something totally unexpected, or maybe it's something you knew was coming but just hadn't fully wrapped your head around yet. What kind of things trigger that this is happening feeling for you?
Oh, man. So many. Like, imagine you're hosting a party, you send out the invites, you think maybe 20, 30 people will show up, and then suddenly your place is packed. It's like, oh, wow, this is happening. Okay, next phrase we got to talk about is I'm not cool with that. This one's all about boundaries. And setting boundaries can be tough, right?
Oh, for sure. And in the episode, Ted uses this phrase when he's talking to Marshall about Lily moving in without any discussion beforehand. It's so direct
Mm.
and clear. There's no room for misinterpretation. It's not aggressive, but it definitely draws a line in the sand. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to use this phrase or something similar? Was it easy to be that direct?
You know, it really depends on the relationship, doesn't it? Like with some people, it's easier to just be upfront, but with others, it feels more delicate. But yeah, sometimes you just got to say it. I'm not cool with that.
All right, moving on. Let's talk about this like adults. This one usually comes out when things start to get a little heated, right?
Yeah, it's like a signal that the conversation's gone off the rails a bit. Like, okay, let's take a breath and try to be more rational here. Ted suggests this to Marshall, basically admitting that their current way of dealing with things isn't exactly mature. So I'm curious, what do you think are the key ingredients for having a truly adult conversation? What makes those discussions different?
I think a big part of it is listening. Actually listening to the other person without interrupting and trying to focus on solving the problem, not just blaming each other. Really trying to see things from their perspective. Okay, now for a phrase that I think everyone loves to hear. I've got your back. Ah, yes. This is pure support and loyalty. We see this when Marshall reassures Lily with those exact words. It's that feeling of knowing someone's in your corner no matter what. Think about a time when someone said that to you. I've got your back. How did it make you feel?
Honestly, it can be such a game changer. It can make you feel so much stronger knowing you're not alone in a tough situation. Okay, let's lighten things up a bit with a phrase that's practically a sitcom staple. It's not what it looks like.
Oh, the sword fight scene. The perfect example. Barney walks in on this, well, pretty bizarre scene, and Ted immediately jumps in with, it's not what it looks like. It's just so funny because, of course, it looks exactly like what it is, but it highlights how easy it is for things to be misinterpreted without context. I'm sure we've all had moments like that. Have you ever been in a situation where you desperately needed to say, it's not what it looks like? What happened?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Usually involving something out of place or being in the wrong place at the wrong time, leading to all sorts of hilarious misunderstandings. Speaking of misunderstandings, let's talk about it's a guy thing. This one's interesting because it touches on gender roles and stereotypes.
Right, so Ted and Marshall are having their epic sword fight, and when Lily questions it, they just shrug it off as a guy thing. It's meant to explain away something that seems totally absurd to an outsider. And on one hand, it's funny. But it also reflects how social groups, like guys in this case, often have these unspoken understandings and behaviors. Like, it's just what they do. Have you ever noticed any guy things or girl things like that?
Definitely. I think it often comes down to shared interests and humor that develop within a group, like inside jokes and stuff.
Mm.
Okay, back to the main relationship drama with you can't just spring this on me. This is Ted feeling completely blindsided by Lily's sudden move.
This phrase really highlights the need for open communication and consideration, especially when you're sharing a living space. Ted's feeling like he's been left out of a major decision, and rightfully so. Have you ever felt like someone sprung something on you, especially in a living situation? How did you handle it?
It's such a frustrating feeling, isn't it? Like you're not being respected or considered.
Mhm.
Okay, and another great phrase, dripping with playful exaggeration. Let's settle this like men. Which, of course, leads to the legendary sword fight.
Right. It's such a funny way to deal with conflict. It's not a real solution, obviously, but it allows them to release some tension and inject some absurdity into an awkward situation. It's like, okay, we're not going to have a mature conversation about this. We're going to have a sword fight instead. Do you and your friends or family ever use humor to diffuse tension like that? What are your go-to methods for settling things?
I think humor can be so disarming. It can take the heat out of a situation and make it easier to talk things through later. Okay, we're getting close to the end of our phrase list. Here's one that signifies a turning point. There's no turning back now.
And this one comes from Marshall when Lily's officially moved in. A line has been crossed. The situation has fundamentally changed, and everyone knows it. Can you recall a time in your own life when you reached that point, that feeling of, okay, things are different now, and there's no going back?
Definitely. I think with any big life change, there's a sense of finality. Like, you've crossed a threshold and things will never be quite the same. And it can be exciting, but maybe a little scary too. All right, last phrase on our list. A warm and welcoming one. Make yourself at home.
Classic hospitality. Marshall says this to Lily, basically signaling that he accepts her being there and wants her to feel comfortable. It's all about creating a sense of belonging. How do you usually make people feel at home? And what kind of gestures make you feel welcomed when you're a guest somewhere?
I think it's often the small things like offering a drink, giving a tour, just making an effort to include them in the conversation. All right, we've tackled the phrases. Now let's move on to some useful vocabulary from the episode.
Starting with bachelor pad, a very specific kind of living space.
Right. In the episode, Ted and Marshall's apartment is described as a total bachelor pad, just a couch, a TV, and lots of takeout boxes. It paints a picture, doesn't it? What comes to mind when you hear bachelor pad?
I think it definitely suggests a more casual, maybe even messy living style.
Yeah.
Less about decor and more about functionality. And probably geared towards activities that single guys typically enjoy. Do you think that stereotype still holds up today?
I think to some extent, yeah. All right, next word. The ever-important dibs.
Oh, yes. This is all about claiming something. Like finders keepers for grown-ups. Remember when Marshall immediately calls dibs on the big room? It's so simple, but it establishes a clear claim. Have you ever had to call dibs on something? What are the rules around dibs in your friend group?
Oh, we definitely have a whole system for dibs. It can get pretty competitive, actually. All right, next word. A powerful one. It's settled.
When the decision is made to let Lily move in, someone says, it's settled. Case closed, no more debate. In your life, what are the signs that a decision is truly settled?
I think it usually involves some kind of agreement and
Yeah.
then actions that back it up. Like, okay, we said this is what's happening, now we're doing it. Right, another great term. Get something off your chest.
We see this with Ted, right? He's struggling with all these feelings about Lily moving in, and he finally has to talk about it. It's a great reminder that bottling things up doesn't usually work. So what helps you get things off your chest? Who do you usually talk to?
I think having someone who really listens without judgment makes a huge difference. Okay, moving on to a more informal one. Chop chop.
Ah, yes. Marshall uses this to try and hurry Lily along. It's like a playful but slightly impatient way of saying, come on, let's go. When do you find yourself using this kind of casual, almost hurried language?
I think it's often when you're with close friends or family, and you're just trying to get things moving. Okay, here's a word that adds a bit of legal drama and humor to the situation. Squatter.
Ted jokingly calls Lily a squatter if she moves in without permission. Obviously, it's an exaggeration, but it emphasizes that he's not okay with her just taking over his space. Have you ever used the term squatter in a similar way, even jokingly?
Oh, absolutely, especially when someone's overstaying their welcome. All right, on to a phrase that I think resonates with everyone. The final straw.
Remember what Ted's final straw was? Lily using his toothbrush. It's funny because it seems so minor, but often the final straw is something small that just pushes you over the edge after a series of frustrations. What have been some of your final straw moments, and why do you think those little things can sometimes have such a big impact?
I think it's because they represent a pattern. Like, okay, this one little thing might not be a big deal on its own, but it's the culmination of a lot of other stuff. All right, on to a more positive term. Take it to the next level.
This one's all about moving a relationship forward. And in the episode, Lily and Arshel moving in together is definitely taking things to the next level. What are some other relationship milestones that you would consider taking it to the next level, and what kind of adjustments do those changes usually involve?
I think any step that signifies a deeper commitment or increased intimacy could be considered taking it to the next level. Okay, last word on our list. Out of the question. A very definitive no.
Ted's initial response to Lily moving in, out of the question. No room for negotiation. When have you had to use that phrase? What makes something so completely off limits that it's out of the question?
It usually involves something that violates a core value or a non-negotiable boundary. Okay, so we've really dissected the language of this episode, and it's amazing how much we can learn about relationships and communication just from these everyday words and phrases.
It's true. And I think what's so brilliant about this episode is how it blends humor and serious relationship stuff.
Here's a synopsis for How I Met Your Mother, Season 1, Episode 8, The Duel. Ted discovers that his name is still on the lease for the apartment where Lily and Marshall live. When Lily begins adding more of her belongings to the place, Ted starts to feel like a third wheel and questions his role in the apartment. Tensions rise between Ted and Marshall, leading to a comically dramatic duel involving swords. Meanwhile, Robin gets invited to a fancy dinner by a coworker and discovers the restaurant is actually a front for a matchmaking service. Barney, ever curious and meddling, insists on checking it out, leading to some awkward and hilarious moments. The episode explores themes of friendship boundaries, moving on, and adapting to change in relationships.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning new words, phrases, grammar, and cultural references from How I Met Your Mother. I'll be back with the next lesson soon. Until then, bye.